Hey everybody, this is Pastor Fran Lehman. Welcome back to another one of our summer conversations that we're doing this summer at LifeSpring Church. I am here today with my friends Cheryl Mealle and Mike Herzberger, who are two friends from our church community, and they're joining me today for a conversation about deconstructing and reconstructing our Christian faith. Now that terminology might be new for some of you, might not be terminology that you're familiar with, but it essentially describes something that's been happening with increasing momentum among people of faith. And it essentially has to do with this idea that more and more people are beginning to question things that we've been taught in the Christian faith, and not to question Christianity per se, but to question things we've been taught and to ask big questions where we're kind of breaking those things down and we're saying, are all our perspectives we've picked up along the way about Jesus and Christianity and faith, are these perspectives right? Or are there better ways to think about some of these things? And so this is happening all over the place, and it's no secret around our church community that I have taken this kind of a journey. And I suppose to some degree, as goes the pastor, so goes the church. I don't know. But many people in our church have, to one degree or another, taken this kind of a journey where they've said, hey, I'm not sure about some things I've been taught, and I wonder if there are better ways to think about Jesus and God and faith and being a human being and all these kind of things. And so I thought it would be awesome to have a conversation with a couple of people like you guys, because I know a little bit about each of your journeys. So I've known Mike for, you said 20 years. I think it's longer than that.
20? No, it's 20.
Is it 20?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
all right,
it's
okay.
20. They're coming up on 20.
Okay,
yeah.
All right. And Cheryl, I've just known for a couple of years, and we've become good friends, delightful friendship. So, what makes this fun for me is I'm kind of an insatiably curious guy about other people's faith journeys. You know, when I meet people, I wonder what the territory is that they've traversed. And of course, in our church community, you guys know this, we do these days because there's so much of this going on out there of people asking big questions, totally different than even a decade ago, that we have people coming through the LifeSpring doors all the time who are wrestling with various things. And so we're going to talk about some of those things today. So both of you have taken a fair amount of the journey that I'm describing. And I'm curious, and I don't know that I really, as well as I know the two of you, I don't know that I really know a concise answer to this question, but I'm curious what it was that happened in your journey that got you asking bigger questions. There was a time where you were going along in your Christian journey, and then something must have happened in each of your lives that, or each of your thinking that made you think those things. So what is that? Mike, talk about that with you.
So I was raised in the evangelical church, basically, and we went to church on a regular basis. I don't have a ton of really specific memories of like things that happened, but somehow when I got older, I found that I did have actually a pretty defined version or lens of what God was like, even though I didn't know exactly how it had gotten there. Now, I do have kind of one story that this is, like a core memory, foundational story kind of thing, and it goes back to when I was 7 years old, so really young. This church I was going to, they had this thing called Brett's Bible Buddies, okay, and this was just for kids. We had some of the neighbors that we went to church with who went to this thing. It was like before a big church or whatever,
okay.
You went there for a little
right.
bit. And this guy, obviously the guy who's running it, his name's Brett, and he does, we do the things that kids do in there, and then at the end, and this is the part that stuck with me, he tells us about this dream that he had, okay? And in this dream, he's in his 20s or 30s or something like that. Him and his friends had died, okay? And they are all waiting to get to heaven now. And they're all in line, kind of waiting, pearly gates kind of thing. Brett gets up to the front, the gates of heaven there, and they whoever's there kind of sees that he has faith in Jesus, believes in Jesus, and they let him into heaven, and everybody cheers and everything like that. His friends get up there, and they do not have faith in Jesus, so they are sent away eternally, okay? And as they're leaving, and I'm 7 years old when I'm being told this story, okay? And as they're leaving, in this dream that he's telling us, they're crying and they're saying, Brett, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us? In the end. And that's sort of the end of the story. So I never went back. That was a one and done type of thing. And so this is not to say that
because of that story, you never went back?
I think that story just left me with a deep sense of unease that I couldn't even define at the time, right? Like I'm 7, it's not like I started deconstructing when I was 7 years old,
No.
but I can tell you, just like kids now, when you hear something like that, it starts to form something inside you,
right?
And that's this sort of story that formed in me. It starts creating a lens early in life.
And I've been in churches that put that on kids that way. But here's, right? So we're basically saying, like, all your friends are going to hell. And the weight of all this at 7 years old is on you.
Yeah, it's the weight of that being on you, but also just the thing itself. Even if you sort of are like, okay, well, you know, they get to make their own choice and you don't leave a burden. It's just sort of the picture of reality that gets created for a 7-year-old in that image, in this picture of what God is like in that suddenly you don't feel safe at 7. You're unsure of if the world itself is like a good, safe place for you to be in. And you worry about people you love and that, you know, like I didn't have words for all that or language for all that, but you just sense this like, what? Like, what is this thing?
Right. And I think really, you know, you said what God is like. I think under all our deconstruction questions, and there are many, I think that's actually the big question that floats underneath all these other things is what is God like? So just can you jump forward and say, like, as an adult, like, what was there a point where you realized there were things you were going to think about that were?
I don't know that there was one specific thing that happened that kind of cracked it open. I just think that I just found that I had this worldview that I didn't like, you know, and I was afraid to question it at the time because I didn't even know there were alternatives. You know, I'm just like, this is just what it is. I mean, there's really no alternative. So I just kind of lived with it for a long time, kind of hoping it would go away. And eventually, I think just time and life experiences and reality. Like, I like to think of each of those little things, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific questions that sort of thing raised in me, because it's not just a story. It's like there are little pieces of that. They each became like little bricks, right? Each of them is a little thing, and you start to build up a wall of things. And I think just over time, it would be, you know, little things just hammering away at those little bricks. One gets knocked out, and then suddenly everything's a little more unstable. I mean, there were big things that happened too. It wasn't all little. Like, the biggest thing, I think, would be the birth of my daughter, who's now 12. Where when you have a child, there comes a point where it's like, I don't want her to think of God that way growing up. And like, I have this love for this child. How is my love for my child greater than God's love for her, for his children? You know, things like that. I think those sort of moments, I think, are just paradigm shifters.
There's a deconstructing question. What kind of a parent is God, right? Okay, let's shift to you, Cheryl. So you're going along, I presume, at some point. I know you found faith in a way that was meaningful for you, and you were going along in a church community, but at some point you started to wonder about some questions and say some of this needs to be thought about or revisited at a different level. How did that happen?
So in my 30s, well, I had an experience as a teenager that with a Christian organization that I was devoted to that didn't turn out the way I thought it would. And in the end, it was a Christian organization for girls. I invited an African-American girlfriend to join, and that was not the thing to do, I found out. And that was news for me. And it was a lesson that I took then with me through life about I don't really trust organized religion. So in my 30s, I hit this wall of challenges. I'm failing at something, I can't fix it. I have people saying things to me about, well, maybe have you prayed about it? Like, is something wrong between you and God? And I'm like, I don't know. So I find myself in a church, and I still have this sort of I don't really know what to trust here. So I was always very careful, but they said the right things from stage, met some nice people. And I spent the next 15 years very dedicated in this church, doing all the things. I mean, you got
really involved in
yes,
ministry.
Yes, yeah. There's an 80-20 phenomenon where 20% of the people are making it happen and 80% are coming, just attending. And I was in the 20.
Yeah.
Right? All in. Me, my husband. But the whole time, I'd be like, they'd say something from stage, and then I'd be like, I'd see something that didn't fit that. And I'd make an excuse for it. Or if I looked under the hood a little bit, I'd be like, oh, they don't know. I'll help.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I found myself just thinking, why, how do I explain this? And so let me say the very best thing I came to at that time was church is made of people. They're flawed people, right? We'll work it out.
Right.
Right? So I stayed for a long time.
And there is a sense in which we need to have grace for that, right?
Yes.
Everybody's on a journey, everybody's figuring things out. Nobody has it all figured out. People make mistakes.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. And so that's kind of the posture I was getting in. It took me a little while to get there. But then starting in 2016, there were some things that happened in 2016 that really made me question. And the first was the fact that starting at that time on social media and in conversation with people I knew, personally knew in these circles, I found some of what they were saying shocking in both content and vitriol. And these were people that I attended church with all the time. The second thing that happened was 80% of white church attenders voted for Donald Trump. And that I found fascinating. And the last thing that was, as I read a book called Divided by Faith, Evangelical Religion and the Problem of Race in America, written by Michael Emerson and Christian Smith in 2000. And I was blown away by the fact that not much had changed. And I think
you were reading that book all these years later.
Yes.
And you were saying from 2000 we haven't really made any progress with this.
There's not, and in fact, I'm like, in conjunction with these other things that had just happened, I couldn't make sense of the people I was sitting next to in church. I loved them, but and they were my community, but I couldn't make sense of it. So, and the other thing that I wondered was how has secular society gone on and made gains in this and valued people? And also something that really concerned me at the time is valued our planet and creation and all of that. And the church does not. That didn't make sense to me.
I have wondered those same things across the years, that we look out and not everybody in the broader culture, but there are many people who have worked harder on questions that have to do with race, that have to do with women, that have to do with how we care for the planet. And I have often watched us Christians be very resistant to even having conversation.
Oh gosh, yes.
About those topics.
Yes.
So I get that. You're looking at it and you're going, how come we won't talk about this stuff?
Yes.
Very
much so. So in my opinion at that time, I was like, something's dreadfully wrong here. And I went from being in the 20% to the 80% really quickly. But I stayed because it was my community, right? I belonged there, I was invested there. But then within a few years, there were a handful of sermons that were done. There were some events that occurred that seriously hurt me and really hurt some of my friends. And the issues were around LGBTQ, race, equity, gender, equality, polarization. And a lot of it came down to this sort of this inability of the church to say what they meant and mean what they say. So we're a welcoming church, right? We're a welcoming church, but you can't be whole here when you actually join this community, right? And people will deny that does harm. And that does a tremendous amount of harm, right?
Right.
And if it was something that I just couldn't sit with. And then there were some other things that happened around, like I said, gender inequality, and it wasn't any more like something's dreadfully wrong here. I was like, something is rotten at the core here, and I want nothing to do with it. And it wasn't just that church. It was what I was being taught.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know this because I know some of your backstory. I know that the church that you were part of at that time, just as our church has been in its history, was part of this sort of larger evangelical kind of backdrop culturally. And so within that, there have been a set of perspectives on quite a number of topics that have been fairly, there are some variations, but fairly universally held across, even across like evangelical denominations or, conservative denominations. And so what you were experiencing being taught in one place is also what, was being taught in many places. To some degree, I could probably say things I taught at one time, in my own pastoral life.
Well, something's going on if 80% of white church attenders are thinking about something in one way.
Yeah.
Right? And people who knew me automatically thought that I was thinking the same.
Yeah.
Which I found shocking.
I have a Substack article dropping tomorrow that I've spent about a month writing called The Strange Moral Journey of Christians in Our Time. And it's kind of about what you're talking about. So I want to go back to you, Mike, and because Cheryl, we'll come back to you. You went into this, some of this a little bit, some of the particular things. I want to know, Mike, when these, use that brick analogy, when you started to mess with those bricks, or struggle with some of those bricks, what were a couple of the specific sort of, if I could put it this way, you and I have been kind of theological think partners over the years, so I'll say, what were a couple of the theological things you were wrestling with?
Yeah, so I'll get to a few of the bigger ones, but really, like for me, it wasn't just one thing. Like it is these bricks, like all these little bricks that add up to this wall, right? And they're all interconnected, and they all form a story. And part of thinking about this faith as a wall metaphor, which is a terrible metaphor, by the way, like we'll talk, like it really is bad, but I think it's
faith as a garden sounds good.
Yeah,
faith
well,
as a wall,
right. I think it's accurate though. I think it's like that's the way it feels sometimes, right? Where it's a wall, like you start pulling out one thing, well, the whole thing feels shaky, and you got to keep it stable and can't let the thing fall over. And then also the thing about a wall, right? Everyone and everything needs to be on one side of the wall or the other. Yeah. I think that is the natural way that a wall behaves. But so some of the questions, again, all interconnected in terms of this overall story. Like just going back to this story that I told about my little 7-year-old experience, like some of the questions that came out of that, like, how is this good news? Like really? How does this not paint a picture of reality as in the ultimate tragedy? Right. Is God the mean one? Now we're getting into atonement theology, where you don't need to know what penal substitutionary atonement is to recognize it for what it is, right? So is God the mean one, and Jesus is the one who protects us from God? Does Jesus change God? Yeah,
if people don't know what we're talking about there, penal substitutionary atonement, that view of the cross, which has been the widely held modern view, essentially says that God can't forgive us unless somebody pays. Right. He's so angry about sin that he just can't forgive us. And so he's got to pour out that wrath on somebody before he can say, okay, Mike, you're off the hook and you can come to heaven. And Jesus, as the nice one, steps in and says, hey, I'll take the beating, Right. But it leaves you with that question of like,
Yeah.
and I've read many theologians who have phrased it that way. So then, is that how the cross works? That Jesus, in essence, is sort of saving us from God?
Right. Yeah. It's like a loophole that
Yeah.
if you kind of do the thing, you can get off the hook, right?
Right.
And it's kind of the view, I think, that we've all kind of held without even knowing it. It's just implied, I think, in a lot of thinking and songs and teaching and all that kind of stuff. It's just there.
And with it, the cross becomes, totally transactional.
Yeah.
Now you and I, we would have conversations about both tragic and beautiful meanings of the cross that aren't even found in that kind of
For sure.
theology.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Like, is there such a thing actually as unconditional love? Because I see like lots of conditions in here when
Right.
you really look at it. What even is faith? Like, and how much of it do I have to have for it to count as faith in this scenario? Is it like
Oh, listen.
51% certainty? Or is it like, what does that even mean? Like, it creates a lot of...
Listen, I was a Word of Faith charismatic back in the day. Quantity of faith was everything.
Really?
And you pretty much always knew you didn't have enough.
Yeah.
Like you were supposed to.
Right? So like internally, I'm asking all these questions, and I'm trying to stuff it all down because I don't want to be asking all these questions, right? But the thing is, the questions themselves are actually, what they're doing is bringing to the forefront that I already have answers in place. Like, the thing, it's already been taught, and I just never realized it. Asking the questions is bringing to the forefront that this whole worldview is already there. And I just, I didn't like it. It got to the point where it didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't live with it. And like I said before, it was like all these little things, all these little questions just started snowballing that. And it's chipping away at it a piece at a time. And yeah, there were bigger events that would happen to, take a bigger chunk. But the sledgehammer type things, if you really want to talk about the big things, it was hell for sure. That was by far the biggest thing. The Bible. Again, very related to one another in some ways, right? And then like atonement theology and all these things together, it's not only theology things either, it's like people things too. It's all connected together. So, those were the big ones for sure.
Yeah, it's I think you've probably heard me say this in a sermon, but the theology we've been given that the only people who are going to get into heaven are those who explicitly know about Jesus by name and the details about Jesus and have prayed this prayer to say, yes, okay, I want you, I accept you. There have been about 115 billion human beings who have lived on the planet in all of history, right? By that theology, 100 billion of them are going to hell to burn forever. And you just go,
yeah, like
I don't know. If I were God, I'd be like, maybe I shouldn't even
appreciate-
start the thing if that's how it works
seriously,
out. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think we appreciate the gravity of that statement right there. Like, you can gloss over it and sort of think, yeah, well, let's just talk about something else.
Yes. And
But
I know some people will even hear this little bit of conversation, which is always the problem with these short conversations. They'll hear this little bit of conversation and they'll be shocked that we would just talk about it this way, that we say we struggle with that kind of perspective.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the thing, is that you either are willing to kind of ask what the implications really are, or you say, no, I was taught this and it's good, and I've got it in a box and I'm just not going to really think
and there
about
are plenty
it,
of people who don't have that baggage either. They don't need to deconstruct this specific thing the way that I did.
Yeah.
One thing, like, you did a class like 2 weeks ago, right? On a Friday night where you were talking about this stuff. When I started this like 12 years ago or something, I didn't know anybody who was talking about this.
Right.
Like, there weren't a lot of like books out there or podcasts
Yep.
or whatever where people were working through this stuff.
It's one of the things we've seen in the last decade is
For
people
sure.
beginning to think and write about some of these things. And it raises all these questions about the Bible and how we read the Bible, how we understand what the Bible is.
Yes.
And you and I, we've known each other a long time. I was thinking as you were talking, I've seen both of us at points along this journey where we have felt overwhelmed by engaging a particular question.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come. I guess we'll come back to that. But so Cheryl, and gosh, our time is so limited. the big things for you? What have they been? Can you give me the list and say these have been big questions that have big topics?
I think the big topics for me stemmed from sort of what I looked at as the core theology I was being taught. Everything about me is originally bad and sinful.
Yep.
Right? I need Christ. This penal theory of atonement, right? That was a big piece that I was questioning. And then you add on to that, like, God's plan. Really, this is God's plan about seeing all of this destroyed? That doesn't make sense to me, right? And then
we're going to heaven, the earth's going to burn.
Exactly. And so I've heard it described. I've heard you describe it. One of my favorite authors, Brian McLaren, describes it as the Great Evacuation Plan.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what that is. So that was one of the big questions for me. I was like, is this really all? This is the good news, as Mike said a few minutes ago, right? This is the good news.
And we never find the Great Evacuation Plan in the teaching of Jesus. Jesus talks about things that are going to happen in the future, but most of his focus is on who we're becoming and how we're seeing other people, and we're watching Jesus, how he relates to other people. He isn't just walking around saying, like, hey, the place is going to get torched. You better get to the departure gate.
Right.
You know?
Right. I don't think he ever said that. And so for me, like that, and then also, is it so individualized, right? And do I really have no responsibility? Like, once I say these words in this prayer, I have no responsibility. It was just a suggestion on Jesus's behalf as he walked this place.
Right.
I have no responsibility for creation. I have no responsibility for how I vote. Like, I've got my one issue, and I'm going to vote that, and the heck with whatever else happens.
Yeah,
like I don't get that. But it comes from this.
Yes, I came to faith in the 70s, and we were very evacuation plan. We were all going to be raptured. We're going to be out of here soon, and so we didn't cultivate conversations about what does it mean to live as a follower of this good way that Jesus models and teaches us. What does it mean to live that in my relationships with my family, with my neighbors, in my community,
Which seems like the natural consequence of the whole thing, right? That you would not emphasize that kind of thing. Like, it, you know what I mean? Like, it's when you have a sort of fundamental foundational teaching like that, well, of course, why that seems so secondary to everything else.
Yeah.
Right.
Why do you care about the planet if it's going to burn up? And God has declared this a failure.
Right.
I'm using the pronoun purposefully.
Yeah.
He failed at this, right? And so he's just going to start it over, right? And he'll take those of us who are good, who pray this prayer, and he'll give us a new city and a new place.
Yeah.
And I mean, if it works out that way, okay. But that's not what Scripture says to me. That is not what God says to me.
Jesus says, put this in your heart.
Yes.
May your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He says to the Pharisees, you were really good and religious, and you tithed even off the herbs in your garden, but you neglected justice and the love of God. Right?
Right. That's such a huge God, right? But this atonement theory, God, the evacuation plan, oh my gosh, that's so tiny.
Yeah.
It's so tiny. And it allows for us to shirk responsibility for so much.
So we're really out of time, but I'm not going to quit. But I'm not going to quit yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So here's what I want to ask you is, how has this, and we have not had enough time to talk about some of these particular topics, like I would have loved to talk more about, especially with you, Mike, about, wrestling with how we see the Bible.
Yeah.
Like for me, I was taught, as you were, kind of this flat text view of the Bible. It drops out of the mouth of God, and you read every verse with sort of equal weight and authority. I now see the Bible as this unfolding story of God walking with people, working with people, and, Abraham doesn't understand about God what Jesus later reveals about God. There's a progression happening there. And so it's really the story of God loving and revealing, and human beings sometimes getting him right getting God right, getting God wrong. And then Jesus comes in, we get this even larger sort of revelation of, oh, this is what the heart of God looks like. And the New Testament writers tell us that. So, but what I'm really curious about as we kind of come to the later part of this conversation is, how has it changed your view of God? How do you see God? How do you guys see God differently after wrestling through a bunch of questions?
Oh, I went from like seeing God in everything, it's this vast, active, adventurous, loving God, to this tiny, punitive God, to now I'm on the other side of that, and I'm like, oh, I'm back to how big God is, and Christ is in everything. Christ is in the birds in my backyard, right? Christ is in my husband. Christ is in some of the volunteer things I do, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it all matters to him,
Yeah.
not just me.
Yeah.
It
Right.
all matters to him,
Right.
right? And then, and what does he call me to? I think he calls me to be a better human being. I think he's calling us to, that may be our purpose, right? I mean, how like the song used to be more of you and less of me, and
Yeah,
I used to love
yeah,
that song,
right.
Back in my 18 years there.
Yeah.
But it really messes with my agency,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Like, I don't think God wants to take over me,
Right.
as I have been told. I think God wants me to be me, but he wants me to be the best version that brings forth the humanity he looks for.
This is a great example, too, of how we read the Bible with lenses. You go to Paul's letters, Paul's obsessed not just with this idea of a new creation, but literally over and over he uses the phrase, the new human being. Mm-hmm. Like, it's right there. Mm-hmm. But if you weren't reading for those lenses, that this is a journey into a restoration of our humanity, into a better humanity where we become better. In the churches I was a part of, you couldn't even talk about somebody as a good person or becoming a better person, because they would quote Paul in Romans and say, there's none good, no, not one, and it'd take you right back to how terrible you were, you know.
Yep.
But this is the journey of our, and
Yep. And I'd like to add one other thing, if I may, and it's about the person of Jesus. So somebody might, wonder, well, if it's not all about penal theology,
right,
what is it? But for me, it's like Jesus came here to draw me into that better humanity. He came here to show me how it works, what it looks like, and he died for telling it.
Right.
That's the way I see it.
Right. Well, and that's, we were talking about Brian Zahnd, Mike. Brian Zahnd was the first person I really read who suggested that while he makes space for Jesus' death and resurrection as part of God's redemptive work, he was the first person who kind of said, like, we killed Jesus. Right? It was human beings who killed Jesus. It wasn't God who killed Jesus, right? And why did they kill Jesus? They killed Jesus because he objected to the religious and political systems of power that were oppressing and destroying human beings. And you go, oh, yeah, right? And you can find that, shocker, in your New Testament. So how has it changed your view of God?
Well, you were talking about the Bible a little bit ago, and the contrast between like a flat text and different ways of thinking about it. And I think I've come to the point where I have no problem at all saying, like, yeah, not everything in there is equal to everything else. Like, I don't need to try to sort of balance things out. And that in and of itself, I think, is a process of really thinking hard about what the Bible is. And that, like you said, that's a whole separate conversation that we could have. But like for me, as I was deconstructing and stripping things away, I mean, I was afraid that there was going to be nothing left at the end of the day. Like, what's going to be there?
People are afraid if they start to pull the threads on the blanket,
for sure,
it'll all unravel.
I really appreciate that lots of people experience things like that. And for me, I mean, I think where I settle is I'm thinking of it from a distinctly Christian perspective, is I really landed on the cross specifically. So not even like we talk about, not the Bible as a whole, and not even Jesus as a whole, but particularly the crucified Jesus. Just meaning that I started thinking about, like, look, if I'm going to think about what God is like and how God perceives the world and how God acts in the world, the place to look is the cross, right? And so for me, it was like, okay, I really need to think about what's happening here. And there's radically different pictures of God that emerge depending on what you think is going on there. And for me, I mean, I got away from the penal kind of perspective of it and really thought about it. And so, like, I'm completely okay being like, look, like the prodigal son, the parable, like, that's my jam. Like, that's where, like, I will,
hands
that's
down.
where, right, like, that's where I want to operate from, that gives me the lens to think from.
And the big brother didn't have to get a beating for the younger brother to be forgiven.
I mean, it's interesting. I've seen people for fun sort of take that parallel or that parable and change it in ways that make you be like, no, that doesn't sound right. But it's sort of like how we do it in our theology, right? When you end it certain ways. Yeah. And, you know, really at the end of the day, what I want and what I need is just a God where I can rest and, you know that all shall be well.
Yeah.
And that is a battle, too. That is not something that is like something that you resolve one moment and then doubts or life or hard things of faith don't creep back in and you need to learn it all over again. That's like, you know, that's for me when I come to church, that's what I come for, to hear that and to be reminded of what God is like. You know, all the other stuff, it's not that it doesn't matter, but it's all little pieces of this big picture, and we're trying, you know, to focus on that big picture.
God is big and beautiful and good, and He's holding all this. We're ultimately seeking to rest and trust in that goodness, not just somehow have an angry God who helps us escape our badness, right? You know, I was thinking, you turned me on to this quote from Hans Urs von Balthasar, and I may butcher it a little bit, but it takes us back to the cross where he says, disguised under the disfigurement of an ugly crucifixion and death, Christ on the cross is paradoxically the clearest revelation of who God is.
Yeah.
Because it's self-sacrificial love. So one thing we have not had time, we are out of time, we didn't have time to talk about is...
We only got through like 3 questions.
I know. See, I told you guys that. It goes way faster than you think. We were going to try to talk about, like, does everybody need to take, you know, a journey of deconstructing and reconstructing faith? And I think what I'd like to do, because, you know, we're shooting this, we'll show it as a podcast, but we're shooting it for a Sunday morning, and I'd love to bring you guys back for just a podcast conversation to go a little deeper on some of these things. But I'm just going to sum up, because we've talked about this, you know, this whole question, do people need to take this kind of a journey? No, everybody doesn't necessarily need to, but I think I can say for the 3 of us that taking this kind of a journey saved our faith and brought us back away from that small and punitive, you know, and just wrathful picture of God back into a big and beautiful faith that sees God as love and that sees other human beings and that wants to take this journey of being made new. But hey, I just want to thank you guys so much for doing this with me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And we seriously, like, I think we should do this again. So there's some good mojo here. So anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. See you soon.